The blood runs cold, not the chill of winter air, but something deeper, a stillness that starts in the marrow and spreads outward until the last heartbeat echoes in your chest, like a drum fading into a distant cave. Then silence, and in that silence you become aware of something impossible. You are still here, the body that betrayed you, the heart that stopped. You are still inside it, watching, waiting, aware. Your identity did not die with your pulse. It survived the threshold. This is the strangest promise hidden inside humanity's oldest nightmare. The vampire transformation has haunted our stories for thousands of years, from the dust of ancient Babylon to the polished screens of modern streaming. But almost everyone gets it wrong. The blood, the fangs, the fear of sunlight, these are distractions. The real horror is not what you become. The real horror is what you keep. Your memory would remain. Your sense of self, your private history, the voice inside your head that says I am. All of it would cross the threshold intact. But something else would be left behind on the other side, something more fragile than identity, more easily broken than bone. Your morality. Here's what nobody told you about the vampire's curse. It was never about losing your soul to a demon or a disease. It was never about a supernatural infection. The curse is that you remain exactly who you are, while everything that made you good quietly falls away. This is the crack where the light, or the darkness, first enters. If your morality is not stitched into your identity the way your memories are, then something fundamental about how you see yourself might be built on sand. If that thought pricks at you, if you feel that tension between who you are and what you could become, subscribe, because what comes next is the part most people walk away from without ever seeing. And I want to know, did you catch yourself pausing when I said your morality would not survive? Did you already know that was true? Imagine lying in darkness. The transformation is complete. You rise from your own death with every memory intact. Your mother's face, your first love, the name you whispered to yourself as a child. You remember the moral rules you were taught. Do not steal. Do not kill. Do not harm the innocent. These codes are still written in the architecture of your mind, as clear as the day you first learned them. But you are hungry, not the mild hunger of a missed meal, not the craving of a long day without food. This is a hunger that lives in your bones, that whispers from the marrow, that rewrites the very grammar of desire. Your stomach does not growl. Your throat does not feel dry. Instead, every cell in your body pulses with a single command: feed. And you know, without a shadow of doubt, that the food you once ate will never satisfy this hunger again. This is where the experiment begins. And the experiment has been running for centuries, hidden inside folklore and fiction, waiting for someone to notice what it actually reveals. The old answer was simple. Vampires are monsters because they lost their humanity. The soul was destroyed or replaced. The person you were is gone, and a predator wears your face. That explanation is clean, comforting, and deeply wrong. Here is the strange part. Neuroscience has been running its own version of this experiment for decades, not on vampires, but on ordinary humans, and the results are unsettling. Consider what happens when the brain is pushed into extreme states. A study from 2001 by Uman and colleagues used fMRI scans to track what happens when the human brain detects a threat. The amygdala, that ancient almond-shaped cluster buried deep in the temporal lobe, activated within milliseconds, faster than conscious thought could intervene. The participants did not choose to be afraid. They were afraid before they knew why. This is the machinery that the vampire transformation would exploit. The hunger is not a choice. It is a biological command, written into the architecture of every mammal that ever survived. And if that command becomes the central organizing principle of your existence, as it would for a vampire, then every moral rule you ever learned becomes negotiable. Not because you forget them, because the system that enforces them can be overridden. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever done something you knew was wrong while knowing it was wrong and done it anyway? That gap between knowing and acting is the space where morality lives, and it is not as solid as you believe. The most compelling evidence comes from a different kind of transformation entirely. In cases of acquired brain injury, patients sometimes undergo radical personality changes. A gentle man becomes violent. A loving spouse becomes indifferent. The family says, he is not the same person, and they are correct. The neural architecture that supported his moral character has been damaged. But here's what makes the vampire thought experiment so much more disturbing. In brain injury, the damage is accidental. The person did not choose to change. But in the transformation, you would remain fully aware. You would remember the person you used to be. You would watch yourself break your own moral codes, one by one, and you would be powerless to stop it. The philosopher Derek Parfit explored this territory through thought experiments that turn the mind inside out. Imagine a machine that can copy your exact neural state into a new body. You step into the machine, it scans you, and then it destroys your original body while building an exact duplicate elsewhere. Is the duplicate you? Most people say yes, but they feel uneasy about the destruction. Now imagine the machine fails to destroy the original. Both bodies exist. Which one is you? And if both can claim to be you, what does that say about the continuity of identity? The vampire transformation is worse than either scenario. You do not get a duplicate. You do not get teleported. You get your original body, your original memories, your original sense of self, but with a new biological imperative that will slowly, methodically dismantle every moral inhibition you ever possessed. This is why the folklore of the vampire has persisted for so long. It is not a story about a monster. It is a story about the fear that you might become monstrous while still being yourself. If this is resonating, if you are starting to feel the weight of what it means to watch yourself fall from the inside, then you are already part of this investigation. Subscribe to walk deeper into the dark architecture with me, and in the comments drop the word identity, because that is the thing you thought would save you, and it might be the thing that betrays you first. Cross-cultural research on moral behavior supports this darker reading. In 1974, psychologist Stanley Reichmann studied what happens when people are placed in situations where their moral codes conflict with survival imperatives. The results were consistent across cultures. When survival pressure reaches a certain threshold, moral rules become flexible, not abandoned, flexible, and the flexibility grows with each successive breach. This is the psychological machinery that the vampire narrative actually describes. The transformation does not turn you into a demon. It turns you into someone who has to choose every single night whether to be the person you were or the creature you are becoming. And every choice in favor of survival makes the next choice easier. Pause here and notice what this means for you. If you have ever wondered whether you would remain good if the conditions of your life changed drastically, if you lost everything, if you were starving, if your survival depended on harming another, you already know the answer. You have felt it in your own body, the moment when adrenaline overrides ethics, the second when fear silences conscience, the night when you did something you never thought you would do and told yourself it was the only option. You have already met the vampire. It has your face. The Romanian folklore that gave us the modern vampire understood this better than any Hollywood adaptation. In the villages of Transylvania, the strigoi was not a sophisticated aristocrat in a velvet cape. It was your neighbor, someone you knew, someone whose face was familiar, who returned from the grave not as a demon but as a continuation, a hungry continuation. The strigoi remembered its family, its home, its life, but it had crossed a threshold where human rules no longer applied. This is the core revelation that most retellings miss. The horror is not that you become something else. The horror is that you stay exactly the same, while the ground beneath your moral feet crumbles. But that raises a darker question. If identity can survive the transformation and morality cannot, then what exactly is identity made of? If you retain your memories, your sense of self, your private narrative, but lose the ability to act on your values, are you still you? The psychological literature on identity offers an unsettling answer. Identity is not a single thing. It is a process, a construction, a story you tell yourself every moment you are awake. And that story can accommodate almost any behavior, as long as the narrative thread remains intact. Consider the case of patients with dissociative identity disorder. The same body, the same brain, can host multiple identities, each with its own moral framework. One alter may be gentle and compassionate, another may be violent and predatory. Both are real, both are the same person. The difference is not in the hardware of the brain, but in the narrative that organizes experience. The vampire transformation would produce a similar effect. You would retain the narrative of your past self while developing a new set of drives that contradict that narrative entirely. You would experience yourself as the same person who once loved, once wept, once prayed, even as your hands reached for throats. Here's the most disturbing implication. Your morality was never as deeply rooted as your identity. Your memories, your sense of self, your personal history, these are constructed by neural networks that are remarkably stable, but your moral code, that is learned, maintained by social reinforcement, and surprisingly fragile. The philosopher Joshua Green used fMRI to show that moral reasoning activates brain regions associated with emotional processing and conflict resolution, not fixed moral rules. Morality is a negotiation, not a bedrock. If your identity would survive becoming a vampire, but your morality would not, then the vampire is not a supernatural monster. It is a natural experiment in what happens when the social scaffolding of conscience is removed. And the experiment reveals something uncomfortable about all of us. The monster is not what you become. The monster is what you already are, underneath the thin layer of civilization that morality provides. The vampire is not a curse. It is a mirror. This is where the real machinery shows itself. Cultural evolution has spent thousands of years building moral systems precisely because our natural inclinations are not trustworthy on their own. Every religion, every legal code, every ethical tradition is a bulwark against the version of yourself that would emerge if the constraints were removed. The vampire does not lose its morality because it becomes evil. It loses its morality because the biological imperatives of hunger override the social imperatives of conscience. Think about that. The moral rules you follow today are not your own. They are inherited from ancestors who built them over millennia, who encoded them in stories and laws and rituals, who knew that without them the human animal would revert to something darker. You did not earn your morality. You borrowed it from the dead. And if you became a vampire, you would discover just how thin that borrowing really was. The folkloric vampire is a warning about fragility, not the fragility of the body. That part is obvious, but the fragility of the self. The part of you that believes it would remain good, no matter what. The part of you that imagines you would resist. The part that thinks identity is a shield against transformation. That part is wrong. Your identity would survive. Your memories, your voice, your sense of being the same person who woke up this morning, all of it would persist through the transformation. But your morality, that would be the first thing to crack. Not because you chose to abandon it, because the hunger would make your choices for you, and your identity would be forced to watch. Here's the question the vampire asks that no one seems to hear. If you could remain yourself while losing everything that made you good, what was the good ever really made of? Was it always just a costume, maintained by convenience, waiting for the moment when survival demanded its removal? The villages of Eastern Europe buried their dead with garlic and stakes not because they feared the supernatural. They feared the familiar. They feared the neighbor who might return, still wearing his own face, still remembering his own name, but no longer bound by the rules that held the community together. They feared the version of a person that remains while conscience dissolves. And if you are honest, if you sit with the thought long enough, you have already met that version of yourself. Not in a coffin, not in folklore. In the quiet moments when no one is watching, when the hunger for something, power, pleasure, revenge, survival, whispers that the rules do not apply to you, and you listen. The vampire transformation does not introduce a new horror. It removes the constraints that hide the horror already there. So the question is not whether you would survive becoming a vampire. You would. Your identity is robust enough to carry you through any transformation as long as the neural architecture remains intact. But the question you should fear is this. What would you become, still calling yourself by your own name, still remembering the face of everyone you loved, while the hunger consumed every moral boundary you ever believed was permanent? The old storytellers knew. They buried their dead with the mouth filled with earth, a symbolic gesture that the dead would never eat again. But the hunger does not stop at the grave. It waits. And it does not care about the person you thought you were. Your identity would survive the transformation, but the person you trust yourself to be, the one who believes they would remain good, that person is a stranger you have not yet met in the dark. We have arrived at the edge of the mirror. If you made it this far, you felt something shift, not in the story, but in yourself. Subscribe to stay with this investigation, because the architecture we are uncovering does not stop here, and I will not stop peeling it back. Before you go, answer this in the comments with a single word. Mirror. Because you saw yourself in it, and I need to know I am not standing here alone in the dark.